some of these other people want a microphone, so I guess I'll start that way. We're in the middle of the school committee right now, meeting, and the last part of it, new business, and it's a joint meeting with the building committee. And a couple of things I'd like to do first is to introduce Dr. Justin Bartholomew, our new superintendent of school at Pentucket Regional School District. We're excited to have him on board, and we feel extremely lucky that we're in together. Along with our newly appointed assistant superintendent, Mr. Brent Conway, and then he can stand up. And before I give the mic to Jonathan, the chairperson of the building committee, I want each member of the school committee to stand up, turn around to the audience. Please introduce yourself, and I'll let you guys pass the mic, because I know you're not very loud, some of you. So, starting with Lisa.
Lisa O'Connor, Groveland, Vice Chairman.
I'm Joanna Blanchard, Merrimack. Chris Renning from West Newbury.
Marie Falzani, West Newbury.
Emily Dwyer, Groveland.
Dina Trotter, West Newbury.
Dick Hodges, representing Groveland.
And the gentleman right here, Hyde, he is our business person that runs all the finances in town. A heck of a job he does, Greg LeBret. And here's the real hero among us, Marianne Napa. She runs the show at the central office. My name's Wayne Evans, and I am the Merrimack representative and chairperson. So I'll now turn this over to our building committee chairperson, Jonathan.
Thanks, Wayne. So I'm Jonathan Seymour, and I'm the principal here at the high school. And like Wayne did, we'll do the same thing. We'll have the building committee just introduce themselves. I think everybody who's here is at the front table. If anybody isn't, come on over. So we'll just do that real quickly. Just stand up and introduce yourself.
Jim Jackson, representing Groveland. Glenn Kemper, Selectman, West Newbury.
Denise Domkowski, Groveland Finance Director.
Karen McLeod, Merrimack Finance Director.
Joel Breen, Selectman Merrimack.
Mike Stevens, Faculty Representative and Merrimack resident.
Greg Towson, Merrimack resident.
Angus Jennings, the town manager at West Newbury.
So before we turn things over to Jason Boone from Dore & Whittier, who's going to walk us through most of the presentation tonight, I just have a really brief sort of just opening. I just want to first welcome you, and I just want to thank you all for coming out tonight. We realize that it's the middle of the summer, and we all have places we'd like to be. We have a schedule to keep with the MSBA, and so we're at the point where we need to share this information with the public and get some feedback so we can continue on that process. What we're going to be sharing tonight is really the culmination of several years of work, really going all the way back to the fall of 2014, where we held some community meetings to just sort of see if there was support for us to submit a statement of interest to the MSBA, which is the Massachusetts State Building Authority. So we submitted that in the spring of 2015, and we were accepted. There were probably close to 100, I think 80 plus applications sent in that spring, and we were one of about less than 20 schools that were accepted. So they really liked our statement of interest, and we were brought into the process. And it's really great to have the MSBA as a partner, because this is what they do. They build buildings, and also they're a financial partner for us. So we're really excited about the opportunity to work with them. So we've been working through the process with them, going through the eligibility period, and now we're in what's called feasibility study. The school committee created the building committee to walk us through that process. We have community representatives across the whole board, as you saw as they introduced themselves. We hired a project manager, which is Vertex. John Lemieux and Steve Theron are here representing our owner's project manager. We then hired a designer, which is Dore & Whittier, and you're going to hear a lot from Dore & Whittier tonight. And so we have been really actively exploring what are some of the potential solutions to the building-based issues that we're having here in the district. And not last year, it was part of this year, just earlier this year, January and February, we had meetings in Groveland and Merrimack where we shared out progress. And that's what we're trying to do tonight. We have some options we want to discuss, share the details with you, and just get an opportunity to hear from you. And that's really what I want to encourage, is that there are particular moments in the presentation where we're going to pause and just ask for questions, ask for comments, ask for feedback, and then at the end of the process, we have a little exit ticket for you to take and just fill out any questions that you didn't get to ask, any comments that you might didn't get a chance to share, and then finally, what do you think is the best solution for where we are? So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bartholomew, who again just wants to welcome you all here tonight, and then we're going to go to Jason, and we're going to start with the presentation. So Dr. Bartholomew.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Seymour. First, welcome. Appreciate everyone coming tonight. I think it's a really important meeting. I've had the opportunity to watch this from afar. So while many of you may have been involved in this right from the beginning and kind of seen this go through step by step, I've only gotten to see the big chunks of it. And I've watched a couple of the meetings online, which I appreciate those being on there, to kind of see a lot of the good questions that are coming in. And so my understanding is this is a great opportunity to hear from the community, to find out what are the things that the people like, what are the things people don't like, and then inevitably that August 7th meeting is where that final decision is going to be made. And that's not the thumbs up is happening, thumbs down it's not happening. That August 7th meeting is just, with the MSBA, this is what the selection is we have. And I believe you all have those pieces. One of the big parts that we want to make sure we have moving forward, we've got the email today, that's wonderful, but we will be posting out on Twitter. These will exist online, the presentation, and there'll be a survey, an online survey. It'll be the same survey you're going to take on the way out. So if you have friends, family, relatives that live in the towns that they do not have, they weren't able to get here tonight, that's fine. It won't be as detailed as what you'll hear. It won't be as many back and forth. Of course, this is recorded. They can go back and watch. But I'm sure we'll just be a 30-minute meeting. But they'll be able to go through the presentation, take a look at it, and they'll be able to fill out their questions they have. And what we hope to do is take all those questions and address some of those, just so we have the factual information out there for everyone to consider. That's going to be really key. What a wonderful opportunity to walk into a superintendency and have this be the first thing you're dealing with, right? It's great. But I am so excited. I think many of you have lived here your entire lives. If you don't know this, I've left everything in North Carolina to come back up home, where I started kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, and I'm ecstatic to be here to help our students have the same experiences that I had, so they can do something, have the same opportunities that I had while I was here. So thank you for having me here tonight. I'm very proud to be a Sachem, and I hope we have so many more Sachems for generations to come. So thank you, Mr. Seymour, for the quick.
Sure. So I just want to turn it over to Jason Moon. This is Jason Moon from Door and Whittier, and there are some other folks as well from Door and Whittier tonight, but Jason's going to walk us through the majority of the presentation tonight. So thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you, Jonathan. And on behalf of Door and Whittier, I'll extend a welcome. Also, I have to start by telling you that I lost all the bets in our office about how many people were going to be in tonight's meeting. So congratulations on that. It's a terrific, terrific turnout. We are going to try to keep the meeting as short as possible, but there's an awful lot of information to get through. So everything that we have on the boards out there in the gallery largely appears in the show. The one exception to that is the individual floor plans. We do have those digitally if there are questions about what the inside of these buildings, the spaces arrangement is. So if that comes up in questions, we can't show you up here, but we are going to rely on some of the information that's in the gallery out there. So please make sure you go and take a look at that. And if there are questions that we don't happen to answer in the formal meeting, we're willing to stay, the Door and Whittier team is willing to stay after for questions or grab someone along the way. So with that, let me start with what we're hoping to accomplish tonight. We'll get into this in a little more detail in just a moment, but we're not sort of voting up and down on whether we support a project or not tonight. We're at the point in the process where we're trying to go from the few options to the one preferred option. So the building committee and the school committee have invited everybody here tonight to provide input on that decision. It has not been made yet. There are still 8 options on the table. So we're going to walk you through what those 8 options are, what the advantages and disadvantages of them might be, and then we'd like to hear from you what you think about those options. Expressed graphically, as many of you know, there are 2 grade configurations still on the table for the what we call the main project. a high school only 9 through 12 grade configuration, or a 7 through 12 middle high school grade configuration. And there are 4 options still on the table for each one of those. So one of the first decisions to be made is which one of those 2 grade configurations makes the most sense, and then after that's been made, which one of the options in that category is the best fit. So here's the short agenda for this evening. For those of you who are brand new to the project, and those of you who haven't seen it in a while, we're going to do a quick overview of the schedule and process. Then we're going to present each option individually in an overview fashion. And then we'll present some additional information and try to have this cost and value discussion. And then we'll close out with what the next steps are for the project. So schedule and process. Jonathan mentioned at the outset that we're following an MSBA process, the Massachusetts School Building Authority. In total, there are 8 modules in their process. The district and the building committee have already completed modules 1 and 2. Module 1 is what's called the eligibility period. It's where you're invited for consideration by the MSBA. And Module 2 is the selection of the team, the owner's project manager and the design team. So right now we're in Module 3, which is the feasibility study. And that's where we explore the widest range of options possible. And ultimately we conclude Module 3 with the submission of the preferred schematic report, which we're planning this fall, and the selection of the one preferred option. In Module 4, we, the design team, take that preferred option and actually go out and design it. We try to document as much as we know about the project in the schematic design phase so that we have a reliable cost estimate. And ultimately, Module 4 concludes with both the MSBA and the 3 towns taking a vote on whether or not they want to support the project. And right now, those are scheduled for Springtown meetings in April and May in all 3 towns. For those of you that remember some of our earlier meetings, the first submission we made to the MSBA is called the Preliminary Design Program, PDP. And in that, the idea was to go from the many options to the few. So originally we studied 10 options for each of the 2 grade configurations, 4 for 9 through 12, and 6 for 7 through 12. And that segment concluded with the building committee selecting 4 options to move forward for further development. 1 9 through 12 option, and 3 7 through 12 options. After we made that submission, we heard some feedback from you, the community. We heard some feedback from the MSBA. So not only did those 4 options move forward into the segment we're in now, the preferred schematic report, but we've reintroduced 3 of the 4 high school only options. So these letters on here, RP stands for repair, and you'll see more about this in a minute. R stands for renovation, AR stands for addition renovation, and N stands for all new construction. So those are the 8 options that are on the table at the moment. And like I said, the objective here is to help the building committee select the one preferred. So that was a very quick overview of the process, but I'll ask Mr. Adams to moderate if there are any questions.
Just raise your hand and I'll call right off the bat. Gentleman in the blue t-shirt.
Yeah, and next to West Newbury.
I'm going to give to you. I'm going to put somebody else here.
You have to stand up too. Stand up too.
Ed Nice in West Newbury.
Just a question on the high school only. Does that mean no renovations to middle school?
So did everybody hear the question? I think if I can paraphrase, the question was, in the 9 through 12 options, is anything happening to the middle school? The answer to that is no. And that's going to play into our cost value discussion. So in a 9 through 12 option, the middle school remains untouched as it is. It's not part of the main project. No, I don't have a mic.
You need a microphone because we're taping it and nobody's going to be able to hear your report.
Other questions about process?
Questions? Yes, guys with green t-shirts.
I'm just curious why those 3 options got reintroduced.
The question was why those 3 options got reintroduced.
Two reasons. One, we heard some feedback at our previous public meetings about concerns about cost. And so could we explore the 9 through 12 options further? And then supplemental to that, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, the funding partner in this project, also said, are you sure? Please go back and do more due diligence on those high school only options to make sure everybody's on the same page. So those two factors were the key contributors to reintroducing those for consideration.
Other questions? I know it's early, but there's a lot going on. Yes, sir, Jonathan? Oh, no?
Okay.
No questions?
Oh, wait.
Okay, over here. Yes, Jonathan? Mike's coming.
In the 9 through 12 options, I understand that the middle school won't be touched as part of this main project, but had been discussed to be deferred to later, or is that would just be a separate process down the road?
Hold on to that question. The short answer is we've prepared cost estimates with both scenarios. What is the main project cost for today? And what does the design team think about the future of the middle school? And should it be replaced in the future, what might that cost look like? So we'll address that in more detail in just a little bit.
Tom Atwood from West Newbury. A quick question on the 9 through 12 options. You mentioned 10 years from now doing a repair or renovation at the middle school. Were there any concerns about other repairs or renovations needed at that time for the elementary schools, since the Bagnall and Cage will be about 20 years at that point, and no work was really done in Merrimack 10 years ago?
So I think I would respond to that this way. Yes, the building committee has talked about that there are other needs in the district, but that this project is focused only on this campus. So for good or bad, there's not anything we can do about those other elementary schools right now. But should those projects present themselves around the same time as a future middle school, that would be over and above any costs that we're presenting today.
All right, looks like we can go on. There's going to be a lot more questions stimulated. Go ahead, Jason.
So in terms of the options, let me first say that you have a very constrained site here and that no option is perfect. We've developed several criteria that we're going to talk about, and there isn't a single option that performs exceptionally well on every single one of them. There are some options that perform better, but there isn't any option where everything that we would like to fit on this campus fits. So here are the options still under consideration. We've got a repair only, a renovation of the high school, a renovation addition of the high school, and new construction for high school only. And as many of you have already realized, all of those options leave the middle school until at some point in the future. Its issues are not addressed. In a 7 through 12 set of options, all 6 grades don't fit in this existing building, so we don't have a renovation only option, but we do have a renovation addition, and 3 different flavors of all new construction. Some that are 2-story and some that are 3-story. In a 7 through 12 scenario, in all of them, obviously all of the middle school issues would be addressed because those children would occupy the resulting project. And the middle school likely demolished. So the way we're going to talk about these is we're going to look at the site plans, and I'll walk everyone through the criteria that we use to evaluate them. In the general terms, the more gray you see, the better. Those circles are good, better, best. And the options are over here on the sides. Let me describe those first. So this first line says building system upgrades. As a baseline, all of the systems in the high school would be upgraded, not necessarily fully replaced. All of the options still under consideration would have full accessibility upgrades. It would be required to be fully accessible by the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board. All of them would be compliant with the appropriate building codes for the project that's touched. So for example, this is the repair only option for the high school only, and so that would be true for the high school portion, but the middle school code compliance would still be what it is today. We have a criteria about whether or not the middle school issues are resolved now or later. The next line down this program line is a measure of how well the option performs relative to what we're trying to do educationally. Right, the district has gone through our visioning process and identified what those objectives are, and we've crafted spaces around supporting that educational mission, and some options perform better relative to that than others. When considering any middle high school option, something that was very clear from the very beginning was how well can we achieve separation between middle school students and high school students. So that was a criterion. Because of the constraints on the site, another criterion was how significantly are students going to be impacted during construction. How close is the construction to where kids are still occupying the existing buildings? Because we've been directed to plan on everybody remaining on this campus even during construction. And then finally, in terms of site improvements, what site features result for each of the various options. And we've identified 4 in particular: whether or not the option has a new multi-purpose artificial turf field, whether or not baseball can remain on the campus, whether or not the practice fields out front can remain, and whether or not site circulation is improved. So in the repair-only option, the systems will be upgraded, but not to the same extent that new construction would be upgraded. And my example of that is the exterior building envelope. So obviously in new construction, you can do whatever you want to do with the outside perimeter of the building. For this repair-only option, we would only be looking at things like new doors and windows, but not necessarily fully insulating the exterior wall, or ripping the exterior skin off, putting insulation, new paper, all those things on the outside of the building. In this option, the educational program would not align with what the district hopes to accomplish. Right? The existing spaces would remain. So, for example, classrooms in general average around 650 square feet in the existing high school. The proposed classrooms are around 900. The existing gymnasium would remain. Right? So all the challenges that exist with the undersized gym that you have here at the high school would remain. And then in terms of the site amenities, I skipped over separation of middle school and high school. Because we still have 2 buildings, there would still be a high level of separation. But for this particular option, that can also be perceived as somewhat of a negative, because students would still have to migrate across campus for middle school students who are taking high school programs as the district intends educationally. You can imagine that doing renovation work inside the building would be very disruptive to students during construction. And then in terms of site improvements, the existing site would essentially remain as it is. Yes, we would have baseball. Yes, we would have a practice field. We would have a multi-purpose field overlaid on the baseball field, but we would not have an opportunity here, or at least what we're proposing is to not have a new multi-purpose field, and it's very difficult to improve the site circulation. With a high school only, renovation only, it's largely the same story, right? The systems are about the same. The one caveat to the building systems is that in this option, we would propose improving the entirety of the exterior building envelope. We would also propose reconfiguring the interior spaces to better align with the district's educational intent. But simply by virtue of it being an existing building, that's challenging to do. So yes, we would have all of the spaces present, we would have the counts right, but the sizes would be compromised. Classrooms are likely still to be below what we would have in a new building. The gym is still going to exist as a roughly 7,000 square foot gym. The auditorium would be what it is. We wouldn't have an opportunity to make those things better in a renovation only from a square footage point of view. We would still have that same separation of middle school and high school because we would have 2 buildings. Again, the impact to students would be significant because we would be doing all of this interior work while students are in the building. From a site perspective, the one difference that we would propose is that we would suggest that baseball moves off-site, and that in its place, a little bit of parking and a new multi-purpose artificial turf field. Site circulation is a little bit improved because there's additional parking to the northwest, but by and large, it stays similar to what it is today. In a high school only addition renovation, those of you who are familiar with this building, it kind of sprawls all over. You can imagine how hard it would be to add on to this building. So we've proposed some strategic additions represented here in orange. But one of the negative things about this particular option is that it necessarily encroaches on part of the retention area. And right now we're assuming that the retention area has to remain. The local conservation commission has deemed that it is jurisdictional. That decision is being appealed to the State Department of Environmental Protection, but all of our options assume that it has to stay for now, and this is one of the options where we would have to mitigate part of that retention area because it is jurisdictional. Similar on the building issues, the educational program for the portion of the building that remains, again, would be compromised just because it is an existing building. The portions that are new, we could fully meet the educational program. And so while it's not represented here, one of the things you'll see in the floor plans in the gallery is that a new gymnasium is proposed in this new addition, and the existing gymnasium is renovated to be a larger auditorium. So there's a little more flexibility, but those internal spaces in the existing building are still slightly compromised. In terms of fields, there's another multi-purpose artificial turf field, and baseball would be proposed to be off-site. The impact to students during construction is slightly better than if we're doing all of the work inside the building, but the phasing would take about the same time. So you can imagine we would have to place an addition and then move some kids in, and then knock some portion of the building down, and then build another addition. So the construction duration is slightly longer than many of the other options. And then finally, we're looking at a new 3-story 9 through 12 option behind the existing high school. And unlike all of the renovation and addition renovation options where some of the building systems may not be fully realized, obviously in a new building you would have all new systems. Because it's all new construction, you would also be able to fully align with the district's educational intent. We would still have 2 buildings, so we would still have a high level of separation between middle school and high school. And now because we're building behind the building and not within the building itself, the impact to students is less. In terms of site, however, because of where this building needs to go, and because the existing middle school needs to stay, there's neither a multi-purpose artificial turf field nor a baseball diamond in this campus until something happens with the middle school at some point in the future. This is the first time where site circulation is improved, and I can just walk you through that. This is Route 113 out here. This is Farm Lane, and the river is out here to the left. So everyone would still enter the site where they currently do, but buses would go all the way around the high school and stage on this leg. And so middle school students would be walking to the middle school. Parent vehicles would enter here in a separate loop, and then student and faculty vehicles would enter into this parking lot. So it's not a perfect site circulation solution, but it's a little bit improved over what you have today. Moving on now to the 7 through 12 options. This is an addition renovation option where all the children on the campus, students on the campus are over on the north side of the stream. Again, the orange areas indicate where we would place new construction. And like the addition renovation options for high school only, the educational program component for the portions that are in the existing building will likely still be compromised. It would be smaller than what we could achieve in a new building. Something else that doesn't perform as well about this option is it's very difficult in this particular plan arrangement to separate middle school students and high school students. We just don't have enough room to place additions that are large enough to house either all of the middle school or all of the high school. So there isn't a clear separation between where middle school students and high school students will be in this option. And then finally, in terms of the site, this one actually performs quite well. Once the middle school comes down, this is district offices. We propose a new multi-purpose artificial turf field here to the south where the middle school was, and baseball and the relocation of this practice field would remain. So this is the one option where all of the site amenities are present. But as I mentioned, the impact to students and the additional phasing required to build this would be considered less than ideal. Moving on to new construction, this is a 2-story middle high school option, again behind the existing building. In terms of systems and education, it performs really well. Again, we don't have the individual spaces up here, but conceptually, this arm is high school and this arm is middle school with the shared spaces in between. So it does, even though they're under the same roof, achieve a fairly high level of separation between middle school and high school. It does overlap the existing building, so the phasing is a little more complicated than some of our other new construction options. In this case, we would likely build everything but the portion that overlaps the existing building in a first step. We would move the high school kids in, we would knock down the high school, build this portion that's going to house middle school kids in a next step, and then move the middle school kids in after the whole thing is complete. So there's sort of one extra step in there versus some of the other new construction options. And then because the middle school has been demolished, site circulation would work much like we just saw, but all of the buses would queue around the back of the building and all of the students would be entering directly into the building. Parents would circulate in front, drop off, and then faculty and students would park out front and maintain that one-way circulation path. Another all-new construction option, this time 3 stories. We were calling this in our office the cube option because it's very compact. And for those of you who went back and saw the models, it sort of looks like a cube sitting on the site. It was born out of the idea of trying to occupy as little site as possible, make the building geometry as simple as possible. So because it's new construction, it does perform really well relative to the top 4 criteria. But in terms of the program, even though all of the spaces are present in the right size and in the right count, the floor plan arrangement of this results in a very introverted building. What we mean by that is the auditorium, the dining commons, the gymnasium are all completely interior to the building. So spaces like the gym and the dining commons that you would really like to have a lot of daylight in and a lot of views wouldn't have them in this option. All of the classroom spaces would have access to natural daylight and views, but in general, we felt that the experience was really introverted compared to some of the other options. Site circulation here is a little different. Buses would still go around the back, but this option creates a new loop out in front of the building where parents would circulate. And then again, faculty and staff would be in this parking lot here to the north. There is a multi-purpose artificial turf field, district offices, but again, in this option, it's one of those where we would propose that baseball goes off-site. And then finally, option 3.3F, which we call the courtyard option, was born out of a realization that that cube option was very dense. And we, the building committee posed the question, what if we introduced a courtyard and made it a little lighter, a little airier? And so that's what this option is. So again, high school students on one side, middle school students on the other side with the court spaces in the middle. And this one performs the best across the board with the exception that, again, baseball would be proposed to be off-site. So again, there's the district offices, multi-purpose artificial turf field, and the site circulation pattern is largely the same. The key difference in the educational program for this one versus the 3.3E option is that the gymnasium is out front and could be daylit. The dining commons runs across the front of the building and it serves as a connector between the middle school and high school and also has a lot of daylight. So in general, we felt like this was a little friendlier experience than that very introverted cube option. And so here's how all of those options stack up relative to one another. Again, the more gray, the better it performs on all of the options, or sorry, on the criteria. And for purposes of the cost value discussion, we chose to only focus on these four guys at the bottom. How does it respond to educational program? How well does it separate middle school and high school? What's the impact of kids during construction? And what kind of site improvements result from the project? And so with that, we'll pause again, and Strategies, if you could help moderate.
All right, we'll entertain more questions. We have one right here.
Bill Ambrolitis from Merrimack. This is a question. Is there a requirement for daylight in a building like the school?
I wouldn't say that there is a requirement. There are some regulations, some best practices. In general, we wouldn't want to design a new building that has windowless classrooms. There's been a link between daylight and student performance, for example. The few things that do exist, for example, the LEED requirements, certification requirements, the MSBA offers up to 2 percentage points reimbursement for certain levels of LEED certification. Part of that is based on amount of daylight in instructional spaces. So ideally, we would try to position all instructional spaces and even as many office spaces where there are people on an outside edge where we would have access to natural daylight. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Next question right here. Hi, Kevin Berube from Merrimack. What consideration has been given to future population growth, particularly considering that Merrimack specifically has been presented with a potential 200 or so unit development going in soon, or maybe not necessarily, but that's what they represent.
Yeah, it's a good question, and we've had this question a couple of times. The short answer is the district and the MSBA entered into an agreement based on certain enrollment. 605 students for the 9 through 12 options, 965 students for the 7 through 12 options. Both of those numbers are lower than what your enrollment is today. That being said, the district also is operating a daily school schedule right now where most instructional spaces are occupied 5 of 7 periods per day. All of our options have been based on that current daily schedule, which means if there was an opportunity to change the daily schedule at some point in the future, let's say you had an enrollment boom, and occupied a more typical 6 of 7 or 7 of 8 periods per day, you were slightly more efficient with the building, then all of these options could house more kids without adding on to the building. So the agreement for the enrollment is already set and it can't be changed, but we're trying to accommodate enrollment growth both within the building, in the project itself, and by positioning the building on a site in a way that it could be added onto in the future if necessary. Does that answer?
Justin White, Merrimack. So we were looking at upgrades to the existing buildings. Can you give a sense from an operational standpoint how a renovated building is going to perform against new construction?
This is actually a more complicated answer than people expect. New buildings will be more energy efficient by a long way, and the systems that we put in them will be more energy efficient than systems that you have today. But new buildings often have more systems than what you have today. So for example, it's not uncommon for buildings of your vintage to not have any ventilation in the corridors at all. Right? That's required by code now. So that's an extra piece of equipment that you have now that you didn't have before. So that's how I would respond to that, is that yes, new buildings are more energy efficient, but there's also more equipment and often more load associated with a new building.
So you said that the buildings have to be brought up to code. So would the old buildings have to introduce the makeup air and all everything you're reflecting?
Yes. So for example, in the repair only option, we would need to meet those code requirements for ventilation, but we may not improve the building envelope to have as much insulation as a new building would have. So therefore, you've got sort of the worst of both worlds. You've got a more energy inefficient building envelope, but more equipment as part of the building.
Adam Price from West Newbury. I have two questions. Can you give me a little bit of comments about the technology upgrades that would be in the new buildings? And the gymnasium, you said it's bigger than some of the options. I just didn't, what would that incorporate, or what would it be like?
Yeah, so in terms of technology, we're just not there yet. The short answer is it would have sort of the latest and greatest of whatever the technology is at that moment. Right? We're still several years from occupying a new building, and technology is changing incredibly fast. So it will have ubiquitous technology throughout, but what that technology is, we just don't know yet. In terms of the square footage of certain spaces, the MSBA has guidelines for all instructional spaces, including gymnasiums. And so to give you a comparison, your big gym right now is 7,000 square feet, give or take. The gymnasium that's being proposed for all of these options as a baseline is twice that size. Right? So the objective is to meet all of your educational and sort of athletic, needs with all spaces, including the gymnasium, as part of a main project.
Hi, Brian Rivers from West Newbury. I have two questions as well. The first is the MSBA, whatever you want to call it, collaboration. Does that have an expiration date? If this doesn't go through, does the collaboration with that team go away?
So there are precedents for projects going on hold for quite a long time while a piece of property gets figured out, and MSBA maintains its relationship with the district for that project. If the three towns decide not to support a project, then the relationship ends, and the district would have to resubmit a new statement of interest to the MSBA, and they would have to get re-invited into the process with no guarantee of either of those things happening.
Yeah, given what you said earlier about us, we made it. We're just, like 20 other schools or 20 other districts that were
right. And Mr. Adams, you have some statistics on that,
Yeah,
right?
19 out of 96. There's 96 applicants, and we're one of 19.
So this is a privilege, more or less. Yeah.
So 1 in 5. So if we go down the road in another decision-making process, what are the chances we're able to be selected again? I don't know. The clock would start again, and we're 3.5 years in right now.
Thank you. And then my second question is for option AR1.2, where you would have the new construction surrounding the renovated high school. What eventually happens to that high school building? That's going to have a shelf life, correct? And now you've got new buildings around it connected to it.
So in any of the addition renovation scenarios, the resulting building, both the renovated portion and the new portion, would be in like new condition. So the renovated portion would have also updated systems, all new finishes, all the hazardous materials would be removed, right? So it would feel like new, it would just be in that renovated space rather than brand new space.
Hi. Could you explain it in a little bit more detail when you say, what you're saying phasing? Could you tell us what would happen to the students while we're doing this phasing? Would they be in modular units? Would they?
For that particular option?
Or any of the particular options. Could some of them be in modular units, some of them stay in the high school, and hypothetically, construction happens 2-3 years, so theoretically a child during this phasing portion could spend their whole high school in modular classrooms.
Right. So for those of you that don't know, the term phasing refers to how many steps does it take to complete the project. I grew up in Indiana. They built a new high school in my community. It's all farmland, so they just went and found an empty spot, a farm, built a new building, and then tore the old one down. We don't have that luxury here for many of these options. So, for example, an option like this, it very well may require modular classrooms as part of the phasing experience because, as I said, we need to build something have a place for kids to move into before we knock something down. Or if the person who's actually building this project deems it appropriate, we may have, modulars out front while all of this new construction and demolition is happening at one time. So it is conceivable, right? We don't have all the details worked out yet, but it is conceivable that for some of these renovation only, renovation addition scenarios, the students are experiencing construction for the entirety of their high school career. Does that answer your question?
Right.
And when we talk about cost, we've added in a phasing premium for those options where we think that either modulars will be necessary or extra steps in the construction process will be necessary.
That you mentioned? Okay.
Mitch Cronin, Groveland. I don't know, are you getting into finances later, or will this be?
That's the very next step.
Okay, because I'm interested, are you going to cover what the different SBAB reimbursements would be for each level?
So we have a set of assumptions for how we built our cost estimates, and there will be nuances in terms of the MSBA reimbursement between each option, but we're still too early in the phase to know what those are for sure. So we've made a baseline assumption about all of the options in the MSBA's contribution, and it's the same for all of our options right now, with the exception of the repair option, which the MSBA would not participate in as a core project. But we are getting to that in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Nancy Stewart from West Newbury. I have a question about the ninth option that's not up here, and it's what I've heard called to as the costly, the doing nothing option. So could you give us in really frank terms what will happen to these existing buildings if we don't move forward with one of these plans? What type of shape they are in, and just what type of an actual lifeline they have?
It's a challenging question for a designer to ask because we can never put an exact expiration date on a building. What we can say is that we did exhaustive facility assessments for both buildings, and many, if not all, of the systems are either at or beyond their useful life, which means that you can expect failures at any time. And you've actually already had some of those major failures here at the high school. You had a major electrical failure, and you had a major water main failure. And so it's only a matter of time before something significant happens. So there is significant need in both buildings. This building, I believe, was opened in 1957, and the middle school was opened in 1956, and the middle school in 1967. So what you've experienced here at the high school, you can expect to experience over in the middle school over the next 10-year time horizon, if nothing significant is done. So I think that's about the best that we can do, is that both buildings are in need, both of them have met or exceeded their useful life, and something significant needs to be done to the high school as part of the main project at least, and the middle school. We're assuming in that 10-year sort of time window.
Jason, what's the typical life expectancy of a project? We'll say this building is supposed to last from 57 to...
The MSBA has a target of a 50-year life cycle for their projects. So we would be positioning materials that would approximately last that long, right? That you're assuming the building is going to serve its educational function for at least 50 years. Now obviously not every component will last that long. Some components will last 10 years, some components will last 25 years. But the building in general has a 50-year life expectancy as a target with the MSBA. These buildings are not atypical to that, right? So we've exceeded that life expectancy now for both of them. Materials like you see on this cafeteria edition would not meet that 50-year criteria.
This is Adam again. I have a question about the process for voting for the communities. Once we pick an option, it goes to voting in the communities. Is it the majority across all three communities, or each community has to specifically approve it to get it forward? What's the process for that?
In a regional school district, all three communities have to vote in the affirmative for the project to continue.
I've had an opportunity to work on 3 building plans in North Reading,
Linfield, and Hamilton Wenham. I feel this is a great opportunity for us. As a school committee member, I would have a very difficult time supporting any of these that leave out the middle school. I feel that they are very important, and by leaving out the middle school, what happens is there's 351 communities in this state. Guess where the middle school goes? It goes right to the bottom of the list. So in order for me to support this, we need to be talking about what are we doing for the high school and what are we doing for the middle school. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Matt Bolsani from West Newbury. The question I had, and it maybe it's just curiosity, but none of the 8 seem to provide an option of either bolting onto the middle school and rebranding it. The school didn't see anything that looked like it played with, renovating the fields behind the middle school. Like, I'm sure you considered it, but can you give us insight as to why everything's kind of on the right-hand side of the plot?
Very good question. When we were first brought on, we were asking those kinds of questions. So should we be considering both the north side of the campus and the south side of the campus as potential buildable areas? And ultimately, what the building committee advised us to do is to only consider the north side of the campus because of the recent multi-million-dollar investment in the fields on that side. And unfortunately, there isn't enough room if you sort of put a big X through that part of the south side of campus. When the existing middle school has to remain wetlands and the existing building, there just isn't enough room to execute a building project of this size on the south side of the campus. So yes, it was talked about. It was dismissed because of the financial investment that was already made in the fields on the south side.
The only other thing I would add on, like I don't know if it's like that, but the circulation element, right now you've got 2 lines of traffic that come in, one to the high school, one to the middle school. With the new construction on the 7 to 12 options, maybe not this one, but anything in the front, I don't know, I guess that maybe it's a smaller item, but it seemed like doubling that up you wouldn't have the runway to keep cars off of the main road, I think, in some of those options.
Actually, if anything, many of these new construction middle high school options improve that. So if we go to this option, at best you've got this little site loop for high school parents to queue, and you've got buses queued the full length of this, and it makes it very difficult for parents and faculty and students to exit, while buses are being loaded, because that whole stretch is being occupied by buses. So in these new construction options, right, you've got this full length for parent vehicles to be queued off the site, and buses won't be along this stretch anymore. The 20 buses will be queued around the back of the building. So even while students are loading and unloading, there should be free flow of faculty, staff, and students exiting the site. So we would consider this an improvement. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's a significant improvement over the site circulation that you have today.
Is there any research on the outcomes, the learning outcomes for students when there is a prolonged phasing project?
It's a good question. I don't know of any academic studies that talk about the impact of construction on student performance, but there are lots of studies where they talk about the acoustics of a space, the atmospheric conditions, either indoor air quality, temperature control, access to natural daylighting. And if the construction were to impact any of those negatively, then you could say that yes, in fact, student performance is expected to also be impacted negatively.
And then my follow-up question is actually following up to an earlier question. So that option 9 of if it fails, whatever our option is, what happens to our high school, middle school district in terms of there's a lot of circulation of rumors in the community, so I'm just asking for some clarification.
As long as the buildings are occupiable, a school district would still exist. If the buildings become unoccupiable, then there's a question about where the kids would go. And right, unfortunately, the design team isn't the best group to answer a question about will our district still exist. So that's the best answer that we can give, is if the buildings, duct tape and glued and are still occupiable, then the district would presumably continue to exist.
I think it's fair to say that would be a giant challenge for the district. Think about what happened with Page and trying to relocate a certain number of students, talking about that on a much larger scale, and how long it would take to make any kind of repairs and reoccupy. Those are all questions, but certainly are huge challenges.
When we get to the cost value portion of the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about risk, and that's maybe a way on one end of the spectrum about risk, but there is risk associated with letting these buildings continue to operate as they are without a significant investment, and that's what we have to weigh is the cost and the risk worth it?
Go on.
Okay. So the cost value discussion. This is essentially the question on the table. If there is a significant need in both buildings, do we take on a smaller portion now and expect to do something at the middle school later? Or do we think there's value in taking on the 7th through 12 grades all in one main project? And so just to remind folks, the condition of the middle school, this is a summary of the facility assessment that I described earlier. And as I mentioned, sort of across the board, the building is in fair to poor condition. And based on our assessment, we think that a significant repair or even a replacement of the middle school is inevitable somewhere in that 10-year time horizon. Maybe it can be extended a little longer than that. But based on all of our consultants' evaluation and our internal evaluation, we think that's about the time frame that we're looking at. And so each one of these rows sort of represents an issue. If we address both the middle school and high school issues now in terms of cost, what you'll see in just a minute is that yes, there is a higher financial investment to execute both of those in one fell swoop today, and it's actually more expensive to wait and do the middle school later, even though it's a lower financial investment up front. In terms of the systems, if you address both middle school and high school now, there's almost no risk of system failure. You're eliminating that from the equation. If the middle school continues, not only does its current risk continue to exist, but it may actually get worse unless financial investment is made to update some of those systems before a major project can take place. In terms of the site, what you saw was when the middle school has to remain, there are fewer opportunities to have the site amenities that are desired on the campus. But when the middle high school is addressed in a main project together, there are more opportunities for those site features. We talked about energy efficiency before. If you were to wait and delay the middle school until the future, you would actually be operating more square footage overall for whatever that time horizon is than you would if you combine the two into a single project now. And then finally, the educational part of the equation. If you were to execute them both now, you would have full alignment of the building and the education on opening day, whereas if you waited, the middle schoolers would have a very different spatial experience and a continued misalignment between space and education. So in terms of the cost, we want everybody to be aware of what our assumptions are. Because generating cost at this stage in the design process, it is an estimate, right? We're making our best educated guess. And so this is how we constructed our cost estimates. All the numbers you're going to see are in millions. We have escalated all of them based on what we think the trajectory of inflation is to the midpoint of construction. The MSBA is assumed to participate in the main project. The baseline reimbursement rate is just a little bit above 50%. But for those of you that are familiar with their process, not everything is going to be eligible for full reimbursement. So we're trying to take an optimistic approach and put a 40% effective reimbursement rate on that. And in addition to that, for the future middle school costs that we've developed, we've taken the most optimistic view and said, yes, in fact, the MSBA will participate in that middle school project too, even though it's 10 years out. There's risk associated with that, right? The MSBA may not exist, the reimbursement rate may change, you may not get invited, right? So there is some potential risk in the MSBA's participation, but we've assumed the most optimistic thing and said, yes, in fact, we think they will participate. For the district share, particularly at the middle school, it does not include any ongoing or emergency repairs that may happen in this sort of 10-year window that we're talking about. So the cost you're going to see doesn't reflect any annual, upgrades to fix, valves or unit ventilators that may break, nor does it reflect any emergency repairs that may happen if the whole main switchgear goes. We calculated the impact to each of the 3 towns based on assumption of a 30-year note at a 5% interest rate. We nuanced the impact to each of the 3 towns based on the factors that influence that contribution, namely the median household value and the number of students that each town is sending to the 2 schools. And so there's the median assessed values for the 3 towns that we based the impact on. Then obviously if any of those factors change, the numbers would change. So what you're going to see in terms of numbers, right, the big asterisk is these will change. We're trying to be conservative, we're trying to be optimistic, but we won't know the final cost of the option until we enter into an agreement with the MSBA at the schematic design phase. So here are the costs. So the way you read this, each option is a column. The top 4 rows are how they performed relative to those 4 main criteria that we described. The next line is the total project cost. That's everything all in. Then we deduct what we think the MSBA may contribute to the project. We add in any phasing premiums that we think are necessary. That would be the modulars and the extra steps in the construction process. District offices in the 7 through 12 options will not be eligible for MSBA reimbursement, so we've pulled that out as its own line item so people can see what that is. And then the main project, right, this, it's just the high school only, or it's the middle high school in those options. That's represented here in this blue line. So repair, $73.2 million. Notice there's no MSBA contribution because this scenario wouldn't meet your educational intent. The MSBA wouldn't support this financially as a core project. They may support bits and pieces of it as a roof repair or a window replacement, piecemeal, but they wouldn't support it as a whole core project. $53.7 million for the renovation only. The MSBA would contribute to that because we would be repartitioning this building to try to better align with the educational intent. But if you remember, the reason that's not best is because there would be compromises in space for that option. For the high school only addition renovation, $69.1 million. For the new construction, high school only, $65.8 million. And then in terms of the 7 through 12 options, addition renovation, $95.6. New construction 2-story, $95.1. The cube option, $91.7. And then finally the courtyard option, $95.2. That translates into about $760 for the average household for repair, around $560 for the renovation, around $720 for the addition renovation, around $680 for the renovation addition, and then close to $1,000 for all of the middle high school options. The next line down is that pending middle school challenge. The district's share of that we think would be in the neighborhood of $41.7 million. And so this green line then represents the campus-wide view, whether you were to do the middle school now or whether you were to do the middle school later. all of those costs to improve the whole campus over time. And I think what you see is these high school only options are actually more expensive in the long run than the 7 through 12 options are in the long run. All of the individual household impacts are significantly higher when you take a campus-wide view than when you take the do-it-all now view. So that is the value cost equation, right? Can we afford, what's the value in either doing everything now or waiting to do the middle school at some point in the future? And so here's a sort of a quick graphic summary of that. If you do the high school only now, you have some educational compromises and potentially significant site compromises. And then the middle school experience educationally is what it is until you can address that at some point in the future. If you address everything now, you get to align with your education fully, and you don't quite get everything that you'd like on the site, but it's significantly better than if you wait and leave the middle school until later. And in total, long term, these two things appear to be less cost effective than if you were to address everything now. So again, we'll pause there, and now that we've shown numbers, there are probably lots of other questions.
Could you explain how the MSBA treats middle schools differently from high schools in terms of reimbursement? There's some things they won't cover in the middle school that you cover in high school, and how that would impact the decision 7 to 12 versus 9 to 12.
So I think what you're asking is about sort of what's eligible and what's ineligible, or what the guidelines say about the two different kinds of grades. So to start with, the MSBA is indifferent to the grade configuration in terms of the baseline reimbursement. So if we were executing a middle school only project, we would start with the same, roughly 50% baseline reimbursement rate. What Mr. Murphy's asking about is, in the guidelines, middle school students don't get an auditorium. They get a 6,000 square foot gym instead of a 12,000 square foot gym. And if you were to exceed any of those things, then they would fall in the ineligible for reimbursement bucket. Right? So you have an auditorium over at the middle school now. If we were to recreate that 10 years from now, and MSBA was participating, that would be one of the items that would be ineligible for reimbursement. Does that respond to your question?
Exactly.
So it's Mike Teresi from West Newbury. Just one thing I don't think we touched on, and I was late, but was that study that was done by Pennsylvania about when a town issues a bond, what the financial impact is to the housing prices that happen?
There is some research about that. Again, this is one of those questions that falls in the not for the design team bucket. But in general terms, when towns have executed major school building projects like this, housing values tend to go up at a faster rate than in places where they haven't invested in towns. But the design team isn't an expert in that.
I actually did some research on that. There's a study from Wharton and George Washington University. What they found is that the approval of a bond for school construction causes real estate values to go up an average of 6%. And that's before a shovel is put in the ground. There's also a study I saw, not to bore everybody, but from Realtor.com that discussed negative impacts on property values. And it turns out that having a strip club in your neighborhood has less of an impact as having a poor school system. It's about 14% negative for a strip club, about 22% for a poor school system, and obviously if the building isn't occupied.
All right, I think we're going to end it right there, Andy. Thanks a lot. Who let that guy have the mic?
Bill Backrack from West Newbury. Has there been any thought to giving the district offices to be off campus rather than on campus? And if so, what is the value of having the district offices on campus?
So I'll answer the first part of that question, and then maybe someone from the district can answer the second part of that question. The short answer is no. We didn't really speculate about what if the district offices go off campus. What we did speculate about was should they remain in the portion of the middle school that they're currently in and we just renovate that, Or do we propose building that from scratch out of something like prefabricated or pre-engineered construction techniques? And ultimately what the building committee advised us to do was to explore the cheaper of those two things. And it turned out that new construction in this building type was more cost effective than trying to renovate that portion of the middle school and retain that as district offices. So, yeah, so this, what Glenn is saying is that if the district offices were to go off-site, you'd have to find a rental facility or find a piece of property to purchase, and you would still be incurring, if it's a piece of property, you would still be incurring the cost to build that somewhere else. The only advantage it may have is giving you a little more flexibility on the site. Does anybody else from the district want to comment on district offices off-site?
If you're asking, is there a disadvantage to having the building off-site, I could not think of one. I mean, it's nice to have the proximity between the high school and the middle school right now, but if we ended up in another town in the far reach corners, I don't think that's going to negatively impact the performance of our children. But I do think, to your point, the purchase of land would probably be a big cost along with that construction.
Or district offices. Yeah, so
I'm not thinking of purchasing land, I'm talking about leasing a facility, renting. That was the thought process.
There's a question over here. In general terms, any costs associated with district offices, whether it's new construction or leasing, would be ineligible for reimbursement. So there may be a leasing strategy out there, but it wasn't explored as part of our process.
Can you explain why we were committed to this site? Because I think people have to understand that if we went out and tried to find new land, that is not eligible at all for any reimbursement. So we tried to do the best we possibly could with this particular site.
Yeah, and Brad, maybe you're the best one to respond to this. We did contemplate other sites and we did discuss them, but ultimately we landed on only exploring options in earnest on this campus.
No, I think that's right. The big driver here is that the MSBA isn't going to reimburse for land acquisition. And when you think about the land acquisition requirement, we're already challenged with approximately 50 acres. And how many 50-acre, somewhat flat, no wetland parcels does everybody know about? You know, we went through this 20 plus years ago when we looked at this the first time around. And we didn't really come up with anything great. We had one potential property that was in Merrimack, but the grade there was bad. But ultimately, I think we decided that the best value that we could obtain was to work with what we had, as well as being able to utilize existing infrastructure, such as the roads, such as the utility connections, and some of those site amenities that were already in place, as well as the investment that we just made on all of the athletic fields.
Other questions? The questions have been really good, but we don't want to limit the discussion to just questions. So if folks have comments about the process or any of the options in particular, I think the building committee would appreciate hearing those as well.
Jennifer O'Malley, Groveland. I have a loud voice.
The camera doesn't know that though.
I have a comment, and it's about the courtyard choice. I really like the idea of the gym, any common space that parents might want to go to school events, or if they're having a show or something that they want to put on, that it should have an entrance on the outside of the building near the parking lot. I hate going to middle school, it's go through the building to get to the back kind of thing, and it's just nicer, and it just makes more sense.
So all of our options attempted to do exactly what you're describing. This was an illustration that we showed in one of our earlier public forums. And what you're describing is that there's a sort of public zone with all of the public spaces immediately at the front of the building, and then things like classrooms are somewhat removed. And we have taken that into consideration in all of our options, but the courtyard option that you're describing does that particularly well because things like the gym are on the front of the building, the dining commons is on the front of the building, The auditorium is right there. And those arms that you see that create the courtyard and the forecourt out in front of the building can be secured in an after hours or evening event, and that's an additional feature that's really great for community use. It's also really important as part of the safety and security strategy, which we haven't talked a lot about for that particular option, so thank you for that. Other comments?
Yeah, let's take this question first, because the mic is here.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I'm just going back to the comment about the approvals process and that all three communities need to approve whatever steps we take. And, you know, the rumor mill's out there, and you hear that there's certain communities that are a little more leaning, you know, against, you know, especially the new construction and things like that. I'm in it for the long haul. I got 3 kids in the school district, so I'm all for the new construction and everything. I guess my question / comment is, if we're looking for an option that's going to get approved, you know, by all 3 communities, do we need to take into, and I hate to be the fly in the ointment, but do we need to look at something that's going to be, you know, that middle range appeal, have that mid-range appeal that gets us an approved project, as opposed to one community saying, I don't like any of this, and the whole thing goes down the toilet.
And I'm sure that's exactly what the building committee will be talking about in upcoming meetings as they hear you and make this choice, right? It really is that value question. You know, what can people afford, but is what we're paying for what we can afford worth what we have to pay for it? So we appreciate that feedback, and the building committee and school committee will take that into consideration.
Hi, I'm Ruth Rivard from Groveland. I really want to see this project get approved, so I'm saying from a very positive light. I have a entering 8th and 9th grader this year. So from my perspective, for my children, I see us being involved only during the construction, and when my kids both graduate, we'll have hopefully a beautiful new school. And I think my perspective probably holds true for a lot of the engaged, active community members. We have middle school and high school kids now. So anything that the building committee can give us as a reassurance that this will be a smooth enough process for our children who are going to really only be involved in the very disruptive phase of this, probably will be a very helpful thing for the voting appeal to the community.
Is it fair to paraphrase that comment as your preference would lie in those options that minimize the impact to students during construction?
Yeah, like I see our football field's going to go away. They're not going to have that experience. They're going to have nothing but being moved around. They're going to be in temporary quarters. They're going to really feel the impact. And so, you know, whatever we can do to minimize that, to make it a positive enough experience, probably will really help the vote.
Okay, good. Other comments people are willing to share?
Yeah.
I'm Megan from Merrimack. Like, I think it was 16 years ago or so, they kind of doctored up the high school a little bit, and I know that costs a lot of money, but don't you feel like we'd be repeating history to not touch the middle school and to doctor it up at a later time to fall back into the category of needing a whole new middle school?
I'm going to politely sidestep that question. The design team has its favorites, but it's not our job to, you know, reveal those or talk about those now. What the building committee is most interested in is what does the community think is right for them. I think it was 1993 when the buildings were updated, and so it was a significant number of years ago.
Hi. So I actually just want to go back one to the phasing question that was asked. And we don't want to have anyone be disillusioned here about construction being, it's a challenging process, right? Just the way it is. But anything up here as part of these options that has an N in front of it is going to necessarily require less phasing than anything that has RP, R, or AR. It's just a fact. So when we're talking about going and doing construction in a building, with students in a building, that's going to be more disruptive. And people need to understand that. So we've taken, from a cost perspective, we've included that. So the cost is in there, but what's not included there was actually one of the value decisions that the building committee and the school committee put a lot of emphasis on, was that disruption associated with phasing. So I just wanted to make sure that we hit that question for you straight on.
I have a similar question to that one. How long would each of these projects take? New construction, how long would that take versus a renovation, et cetera?
So typically when we're looking at a new construction, it's in the 24-month phase to go and build the building, but another 6 months to come back, do the demo, depending upon what the option is and the site work, plus or minus. When we look at having to phase, depending upon how intensive the phasing actually would be, we're actually thinking that that's probably going to add about a year to the duration of the project. And so we've incorporated that additional year of escalation into our project costs. So, add plus or minus again about a year when we're talking about repairs or renovations, depending upon the option.
So, I have just a quick comment, and I was at the meeting last winter that was at the Sweet Start in Merrimack, and then and now, I'm just impressed when you see the numbers written out, that I think that a lot of people might assume that repair only would actually be the most affordable option, and I just want to point out what is very noteworthy is it's actually by far the most expensive option when you look at the green line, which is when you combine all the potential costs, including the middle school. So, I just wanted to express my opinion that I think that the courtyard is by far the best option to move forward with, especially when you do the cost comparison. I mean, it definitely isn't the most expensive, but I think it's the most comprehensive option. It's slightly more expensive than I think what you call kind of like the box that didn't provide a lot of natural light. It just seems like, by far that would be the best experience. We're thinking about a school as a community building, it shouldn't be this like dark, unpleasant place to be in. So I'd like to just, I think that one is clear front runner, or, probably the strongest option up there.
Matt, did you have a question?
Still mad. The comment I had, I guess, is, and I know all the different diagrams that are up have a cost to them and an effort, but I guess I'm just still really surprised to not see anything that kicks around the idea of addressing the southern campus. I mean, of the four combined building options, just simple math, it's right around 95 million for each of those options. And I think you opened with a comment that there's no perfect option to go with, that to even just not see one option that, even if it just comes up with a number of $6 gajillion, just to say that this is not a good idea. And I understand the investment made in those fields, but where another $10 million equates to $10 a month, it's just surprising, I guess. That's all.
So in the PDP phase, we did explore a much wider range of options, one of which was positioning a new building where the existing middle school is located. But you can imagine the difficulty of finding a home for those middle school students while that project was under construction. So that was at least one option that we did look at on the south side of campus, but that particular option wasn't selected for the shortlist to move into this phase.
Oh, I have the mic back here, sorry, back here. Yeah. So we have about 150 people here or so, and it seems like that's what we get for just about every meeting. In a district of about 15,000 people, we're learning a lot of information here that seems like it takes a lot of explaining to get people to understand. Do we have a solid marketing plan to get this out to the other 14,500 people to make sure they really understand all the consequences of each different option and what ends up being presented to them when it comes time to make a vote?
Does someone from the building committee want to speak to that?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's a challenge, right? Like Jason said, he lost all the bets tonight about who was going to show up, and I think we're all feeling really great that the room is full. And I want to thank all of you for coming. I know there's lots going on in the summertime. But how do you reach those other people? And I think as we move through this project, that's one of the challenges that we're going to face. And as we move from this particular part, this PSR, into that final funding vote, is when we really need to find a way to reach into every household and make sure they have that information. And I think as we go through the fall, and then as we round the new year, and we head towards those spring funding votes, you're going to see a lot of targeted information coming out so that people really understand what it is that they're going to be asked to vote on when it comes to that time.
Also, the school committee, and as part of that, the building committee has started, there is that an action committee that has been formed, and the school committee members have been discussing other ways to reach out, sort of do marketing, I guess is the right word for it, and get that information to additional people. So,
yeah, there's a sign up outside if anyone is interested. Pentucket, We Are Pentucket, it's a committee that some parents formed to kind of get everyone together, or get people from each town to kind of volunteer and figure out how to reach all those people that we need to reach. So you can sign up there.
I'll only add to that I think the building committee has had this discussion quite a lot already, but they've been waiting until there's a single preferred option selected before that effort starts in earnest, right? The MSBA process is one where we go all the way through the schematic design phase before we get the MSBA to approve and we get the towns to approve. So as Jonathan was saying, we're trying to get through this next preferred schematic report submission where we identify the one, and then that effort will start in earnest as we enter the schematic design phase.
If I could say something, this is Dina Trotter from the school committee. She is the chair of the communication. And your question or comment right now is perfect. Most of the Cape Ann League, as you know, most all of them have brand new facilities, all within 10 years. We're the only district that has not had a major change. If you go to the sporting events around here, if you go to anything here, you listen to these people, you know that what we presently have is antiquated. But we also know that the task ahead of us is great. And we were, just as Jason was saying, we're waiting until this position to find out from you, the stakeholders, what your opinions are. And I believe when we go to the one, now we can get going with what the other communities did when some of these communities said they haven't got a chance of passing. But it was a grassroots effort, door-to-door campaign from the stakeholders that caused these to pass. A lot of them had thoughts that they would never, ever pass if it weren't for the stakeholders. So, once we get it down to one, Ms. Trotter and her assembly of people, hopefully across all three communities, will get the message out there, because it's going to be absolutely necessary in all three communities. And I would put the onus on you people too, since you are the stakeholders, you're here tonight, so it's important for you. So once we get going on it, it's going to take a lot of effort on your part too. And said we'll have an updated cost, etc., as we go forward. But we had to wait until we had some preliminaries out there for you in the final vote.
Just one thing to add in terms of the question of how does this project get marketed, and to add to the point that Jason made is the MSBA process is such that once the preferred option is selected at this stage, then the more detailed schematic design takes place to develop a much more refined estimated cost. At that point, that's presented to the state, to the MSBA, and the MSBA board has to vote on it before the communities vote on it. And when the board elects to go and support the project, which ultimately we're confident that they will, then they're going to come back to the communities. They're going to come back to Pentucket and say, if you guys go and pass this within 120 days, because that's the window that you have, we will go and support you with this. and that's their reimbursement portion. And those numbers will have been refined at that point, so there won't be any more speculation in terms of is it 40%, is it 42%, or whatever that reimbursement rate is. So at that point, that's a huge selling point. And a lot of times, most times, that's what the communities are going to be able to go and leverage, because somebody said it here earlier, that there are 351 communities in Massachusetts, and if you don't get this passed, then that's going to go to somebody else.
If I can just follow that up for a second. As long as when we go to do this and get out to everybody in the community that isn't in this room currently, that we tell them not only this is what we chose, but this is why we didn't choose everything else, because you're going to get people out there, if we go with the full-on repair, or rebuild everything, that are going to just see that, and they're going to say, well, no, I don't want to rebuild a new school. Why didn't they just repair the old one? Everything's fine with the old one. So you've got to make sure that we market it properly in such a way that people understand how we got to this point.
Jim Logan, Groveland, Mass. I just have a question. I would like to see a hard copy that I could pick up at Town Hall, in Town Halls actually, so that we can go into detail more, as opposed to just getting a little thing on the windows over here. I'd like to see a hard copy if that's all possible. And a picture also.
We can work with the district to provide that. There will be, in addition to this presentation and others, there will be a whole binder that forms the submission to the MSBA, and it's not uncommon for cities and towns to provide that as a hard copy at a local municipal building, and so I think we can make that happen.
Yep, and just so that you know, this entire presentation is currently on the high school website. The homepage, there's a tab that says MSBA Building Project. You click on that, click on Building Committee. Well, no, and I know, Denise is going to take care of you, Jim. But for everybody else out there who could access it that way, this is the way you can find that presentation. Okay?
Hi, Glenn Kemper, West Newbury representative, selectman representative to the building committee. I think it's important to understand, I've heard a few people tonight say about rumors and stuff. I think this committee has been a very positive committee, along with the school committee, up to the point that we have right now. So I think all the representatives from all the towns it's been very positive. So we haven't heard any rumors or things like that, and we're trying to reach out. So I think the marketing starts is the reason why we're here tonight. Because we don't want somebody to walk away tonight and say, or at least I don't want somebody to walk away tonight and say, well, I wish they had that in the building, or are they separating the middle? I'm surprised that no one's asked, are any of these options separating the middle school and the high school, because that was a big concern with the parents early on. So the marketing starts here. Tell us your comments. Tell us things you don't like, so maybe we can fix them. So the more we fix, the more we mold it to the community, the easier it will be passed. So that's why we're here tonight, and we're going to try to reach out to people as much as we possibly can.
Thanks, Glenn. And I just wanted to make a quick comment. We passed out while we were answering questions and such this little half sheet, and that's really part of the purpose for that. A lot of you have asked questions, but we always leave with like the question, I didn't think to ask that, or the comment maybe you didn't want to make. So before you leave tonight, we have a box by the door. We'd love for you to just fill that out to whatever degree. If you don't have a question, fine, don't write it. But there are a few things there. Just jot down an answer and drop it in the box on your way out, just as a way for us to take the temperature of everybody that was here. More questions or comments before we turn it back over to Jason? Okay, I see one hand here and one hand there.
I just have one last comment. I know I keep talking tonight, so. I just wanted to introduce the three co-chairs of the We Are Pentucket Political Action Committee, Julie Teresi, Rachel Jones, and Ashley Davis, and I'm Nancy Stewart. I'm working on communications, which speaks exactly to your question. So we are all based in West Newbury, but we have a group that actually has representatives from all three towns. We are very concerned, very passionate parents of kids in many different grades, but we are going to be working really hard to make sure that whatever option comes through gets passed. As Dina mentioned, there is a table out front, there's a sign-up sheet. If you put your name and your email on there, then you will be plugged into all of our updates and you will know everything that we are doing. If you want to talk to any of us about getting involved, you see what all of us look like sitting right here. We'll stick around afterwards, so please do feel free to come over and talk to us. Thank you.
One in the back, and then we'll get to you in the front.
Rick Bridges from West Newbury. Could you speak to the process with MSBA for the option that's delivered to them? What would the reasons be for them voting it down? And then what would be the timeline to kind of restart the process?
I don't know of any precedents where the MSBA has just flat denied their portion of the funding. There have been examples where they've said, you know what, let's put the brakes on and go back and revisit a few issues before we proceed. So as long as the proposal put forward aligns with their guidelines, meets their expectations, there's very little, if not no chance that the MSBA is going to provide their share of the funding. So it's a fairly safe assumption that given those circumstances, they would participate in whatever project the building committee and the community select.
Karen Den in West Newbury. Is there any way to get a feel for which option is going to be voted most likely in spring? You know, my point is if the committee puts forward renovation, I'm sorry, I'm voting no because all I want is new construction. So is there any way to know what is, you know, is anyone going to be taking a pulse
Of the room tonight?
No, of the three towns before they submit one for vote? Am I understanding correctly, the one is going to be submitted for vote of the towns?
That is correct.
Okay. How are we going, who is going to decide the one that is?
So what's going to happen next is that the building committee and the school committee will digest all of the feedback that we've heard and any additional feedback that comes in via the digital technique that the superintendent spoke about at the outset of the meeting. And on August 7th, there's going to be another joint meeting where they're going to have exactly this discussion. What did we hear? What do we think? Which option are we going to choose? Because ultimately that decision resides with them. Right? They will be the ones putting that option into this ESR submission and recommending that to the MSBA.
Then maybe what I should say is, I guess as a parent, my kid's going into 9th grade. So the reason I am only for new construction is because, first off, I don't want him to go to a school that we do nothing. I also don't want him to have to be in a school that is being renovated his 10th and 11th year. So I guess my point is maybe what I should do is vote yes, but then I move. You know, I feel like I can't win here unless I get option in 3.3F. You know what I mean?
So we're going to know in a couple weeks which option the school committee and the building committee is going to be then marketing and next spring asking for all three towns to vote to support. So the meeting on August 7th is going to be that one option out of the 8 that are left. And then you'll know that, everyone will know that in August. And then, no, so the spring, it's we'll have from August until next
April and May.
April and May town meeting for y'all to tell all your friends and make a good decision. No, but, so that's tonight, and these feedback forms, and anyone who wants to come talk to any of us or send emails or anything like that in the next few weeks to make that decision about
Yeah, so let's be clear about that process, right? The decision to identify the one resides with the building committee and the school committee, but the decision to support or not support the project resides with the citizens, right? And so on August 7th, we'll have that joint committee where they weigh all of the information that they have at their disposal right now to select the preferred option. That will be submitted to the MSBA as part of this next major package on September 12th. The MSBA will provide feedback on that selection, and ultimately we're expecting them to vote to authorize the project to proceed into schematic design on October 31st. Once we have that authorization to proceed, then we start developing the schematic design in earnest. And it's between that moment and the Springtown votes in April and May that all of this messaging will occur out in the 3 communities. Norton Whittier's going to be busy designing. We'll submit, so all of the cost numbers that Brad spoke about, that schematic design package will all be known in January. So that'll be another bit of information. Still several months to go in this messaging effort that will help you get the information out to the 3 communities before they have to vote to support the project.
All right, Ms. Galloway.
My question is, you mentioned that it's 24 months approximately if you were going to do new construction. Is that 24 months from when we vote to fund it, or when does that 24 months begin? What are we looking at for timeline?
So typically from the submission of the schematic design, it takes about 8 months to finish the design work, give or take, right? And then once the project goes out to bid, once they start putting shovels on the ground, that's when the 24-month clock that Brad mentioned starts. So from today, we're actually looking at closer to 3 years, right, to occupancy from today.
You just said from today. So you said occupancy would be 3 years from today.
Or 3 years from the vote.
Or is it 3 years from the vote? Because that's a big difference. That's a little graduating class.
Right, now you're right, it's April, so the towns vote, then we'll do the rest of the design, the detailed design, 8 to 12 months, and then from then, 2 to 3 years, depending on which option selected to build. So the starting point really is when the towns make a decision to fund.
Is there any way to speed it up?
You want to answer that?
Not on mine.
The answer is unfortunately not really. And the reason for that is it has to do with timing of the towns and their votes and when those are going to happen, when the MSBA process, how that works, when their board is scheduled to vote. So by the time we get done with this next phase, the schematic design phase, we're planning on having that done around the end of the year, so we'd be submitting it around the first of the year. They have to review it. Their board vote, which they just announced, is coming out, I believe, on February 13th of 2019. So that, at that point in time, if they voted that forward, which we're comfortable or optimistic that they will, then at that point in time, the 120-day clock starts. And then your town votes are April and May. So we can't do that any faster. We can't really design it much faster. And if history tells us, as a precedent, we can't really build it that much faster. There's a lot of building here. So that's about where we are.
Right. The towns not vote on the same day?
Yeah, it's all about the same time, right? Is it all on the
But I think what he means is it has to pass town meeting and then it has to pass the ballot.
correct?
Does the ballot vote on the same day?
Yes. Across all 3 towns.
We're going to go to team finance here now.
Thank you. Yes, so all 3 towns have town meeting the last Monday in April, and the following Monday, the first Monday in May, is the town election for all 3 communities. It has to pass both town meeting and the town election unanimously. Unanimously by all 3 towns, I mean.
A slightly lower bar.
So with that, we have one more comment?
What's the percentage of people that have to vote in order to get a majority?
Yeah, so town meeting, it requires a 2/3 vote because it's a debt exclusion. The town election, you just need 1 more to vote yes than vote no.
So on behalf of the design team, I'll thank you for your patience and your attendance. We actually ended earlier than I thought also, so I lost that bet too. The design team will remain around if anybody has any lingering questions. We would also invite you, if you haven't yet, to see the other information that's over here at the other end of the cafeteria. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jonathan.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say finally that the box that you can leave your half sheet in is right outside. So as you walk out, there's a table sitting right there. Please leave that behind. Thank you very much. Oh, and I guess the other thing, I just wanted to emphasize again that the high school website, there's a tab, has all the building, has meetings, agendas, minutes, there's videos. This presentation was filmed, it will be there along with the slideshow. So for the folks who couldn't make it, they can go there, they can see it and watch it for themselves. Thank you for coming.
School committee, looking for a motion. Motion, second.